So the second episode, entitled Princess Buttercup, debuted alongside the first.
And this is surprisingly important to note, since this show actually treats each short as its own individual episode, whereas the original show always paired two shorts together and treated them as the same episode.
These two episodes do have similar morals to them, so it's worth noting that these two being paired together at the beginning is somewhat fitting.
I'll get into that near the end, though. This is also the first episode in which a named villain is introduced, since the first episode was more about the interactions between the girls specifically. So we're going to see more villains and side characters be established in this episode than in the previous one.
The episode opens with the narrator stating what we can already see for ourselves.
You know, it makes sense to do this if every episode started with some sort of narration in order to provide some kind of context, but that's not really what's happening here, especially since this narration is just, it's lunchtime, which we can kind of figure out from the fact that this takes place in a cafeteria.
Anyway, Blossom and Bubbles are scrapbooking with an unnamed girl. This is a particularly girly activity, so naturally Buttercup shows up with sloppy joes. And a slice of pizza, but that's not important. What's important here is that Buttercup scraped her forehead by arm wrestling a forklift.
Okay, before I get into what this provides for the episode positively, how do you scrape your head at an arm wrestling match?
Whatever. The point is, the scene serves as a way to establish the character traits that the initial conflict of the episode will build on. Namely, Buttercup's a daredevil tomboy, and her sisters are not that. Buttercup goes to sit by herself when a bunch of clones on roller skates show up and head right for Buttercup. One of them isn't a clone though. Her name is Malin, and she's the leader of the Derbytons, who are the aforementioned clones. I call them clones because all the characters shown look exactly the same, save for hair color and the color of the broken heart symbol on their helmets.
And there's some shots, like the main shot of Malin, where not even that is different.
Anyway, they do stuff on rollerblades. These things include some sort of cross between roller derby and dodgeball called deathball.
I don't really know. I'm just guessing the nature of the game based on the footage we see in this episode.
It's worth noting that one of the things Malin points out is the head scrape that Buttercup was bragging about earlier.
This provides a contrast between the other two girls and the Derbytons, noting that the Derbytons are more inclined towards Buttercup's tomboyish tendencies.
Buttercup decides to go find out about Deathball, and then our villain for this episode appears. Her name is Princess Morebucks.
You might remember her from the original show, just maybe?
Blossom appears to know Morebucks to a certain extent, which is likely because they go to the same school and Princess Morebucks is established as a rich brat when she offers to replace Buttercup in the team.
Not to mention her name is Morebucks! I said more dollars! Jesus.
Anyway, Blossom is confident that Buttercup hasn't abandoned them, namely because she just now fucking left. We then get a montage of Blossom and Bubbles trying to do things they would do with Buttercup, interspersed with Buttercup playing Deathball, a game in which apparently flying is not against the rules.
I'm pretty sure that most sports, especially ones that involve specific equipment for movement on one's feet, would not allow flight if it were an option, but what do I know? The game's called Deathball.
Anyway, Blossom and Bubbles show up to give Buttercup some leftover lasagna. We see a sign that Buttercup is even further integrated into the Derbytons through the nickname of Butlin, which
doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, first of all, the transition into this exchange is the crowd chanting Buttercup, and then you hear Bubbles chanting on her own. Why would the Derbytons, the entirety of the crowd, based on the visual that's provided, be chanting for Buttercup if her name is Butlin now? Also, Butlin is not the best name to use for this either. It should be Balin, since, all the other Derbyton names don't just rhyme with Lin, they have the A-Lin sound. Malin, Jalen, Bobby says Raylin, best Derbyton. I mean, I guess Bubbles doesn't have a butt joke to snicker at, but would the world really be worse off with one less butt joke?
Anyway, the Derbytons, including Bobby Sousa Raylan, best Derbytont, go somewhere, making Bubbles sad. Bubbles in the next scene will actually start to question if Buttercup has abandoned them, but Blossom still holds to the fact that Buttercup will be there when it counts. Then Morebucks shows up, still trying to get into the Powerpuff Girls. Blossom points out that Morebucks doesn't have any powers. So Morbuck shows off her technology that gives her powers. After Blossom tells Morbucks off, she calls up a monster to attack Townsville in order to prove that Buttercup won't be there for them.
This establishes the reason that Morbucks is a threat to the girls, namely money and her ability to acquire expensive and advanced technology.
Blossom and Bubbles see the monster, and
Trouble! Let's go, Bubbles! But what about Buttercup? She'll be there.
I'm not sure, but I swear I recognize this from the original show. I mean, I'd have to dig to find it in the original show, but it does sound like something that, word for word, delivery and all, would be in the original show. If so, it's a nice callback. If not, then I gotta give props to the quality of the writing for being able to trick me like that. But whatever, it's not even really that important. We got a plot to get to.
speaking of the plot, Buttercup is hanging out with the Derbitants in what I guess is a crack house. Buttercup uses Bobby Sue's Raylan, best Derbitant, to break the wall and seize the monster. The Derbitants try to stop her from helping before realizing that Morbucks paid them to keep Buttercup from helping.
The way the scene's dialogue is structured indicates that the Derbitants seem to be doing this out of necessity rather than out of malice.
And that they actually like Buttercup, despite the deceptive intentions, which serves to build up what happens later, and hints that the Derbitants aren't really villains even though they commit what could be considered a villainous act. Buttercup threatens violence,
And jump cut.
the girls are getting pounded by the monster. Naturally, Morbucks is there and has a pretty easy time convincing Blossom to make her a Powerpuff Girl.
Which, probably would have been made more interesting if Blossom resisted more at first. Especially considering the line right before this was, "She'll be here any sec."
Anyway, Morbucks essentially tells the monster his job is done after Blossom agrees.
And jump cut.
Buttercup beats up the Derbitants. Malin states her respect for Buttercup.
And jump cut.
Morbucks traps the girls in an indestructible diamond because she wants to be the only Powerpuff Girl.
Wait, if that's the case, why did you need Blossom's permission in the first place? If you're gonna destroy the other Powerpuff Girls anyway, you could just destroy them and then make yourself the only Powerpuff Girl, since you already have the outfit. I think what's going on here is really a case of sort of mistaken motivation from the original show. You see, in the original show, Morbucks at first did want to join the Powerpuff Girls, since the Powerpuff Girls were the only people whose respect she couldn't buy, and that appears to have carried over. But after Morbucks was rejected, even though she had powers, she wanted to destroy them. And that appears to have carried over as well. It's like a hybrid of Morbucks' original motivation and Morbucks' later motivation. And it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I honestly think the writers got confused.
Buttercup shows up, and there is much rejoicing.
Not to mention, they learn a lesson about the power of sisterhood. See what I mean about this pairing with the last episode?
Anyway, Morbucks has a mech, and she's gonna destroy the girls.
By some means. The two of them are in a crystal that Morbucks herself called indestructible. And, it's not like shaking the thing is going to do any real damage to them. I mean, I guess they have to eat and drink eventually, so, I don't know, good long-term plan?
Shame the Derbitants have decided that they're good guys now, because these are the rogues with a code of honor, apparently. They proceed to break the diamond with their rollerblades.
Guess it wasn't all that indestructible then if a bunch of punk kids with rollerblades can destroy it. Unless, of course, the Derbitants have some kind of superpower related to breaking things. That's the most logical thing that's happened this entire episode!
Anyway, Buttercup powers out of the mech's grip, which she could have done at any time if she was able to do it now, by the way, and then the girls throw shards of diamond at the mech to break it apart. We then get a lesson of don't abandon your friends or family, and then we get a closing gag with the whole and so once again the day is saved thing.
Why wasn't this, or the narrator for that matter, in the first episode? I mean, it's not like they would have been out of place in that episode. And, it just seems like the people who don't know the original show are just kind of left a little bit more confused by it. I think that's something that sort of permeates this entire episode. There's just a little bit of confusion for new fans, but not enough to really fully detract from what's going on. Just something to sort of, just make it not 100% good. It's a step down from the first episode, but I wouldn't really call it an abject failure. things fit together decently, but they really would have fit together a lot better if there was just a little bit more explanation and a little bit more care put into what was going on.